The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control, A Path to Peace and Power by Catherine Morgan Schaeffler. Introduction. Perfectionism is a power. The night before our wedding, my husband and I decided to sleep separately so that each of us could spend the evening in the most relaxing way possible before our big day. I returned home from the rehearsal dinner at around 10:30 p.m., walked my dogs while responding to emails, and then worked out. After working out, I took an amazing shower, rewrapped the gifts I was giving to my bridesmaids the following day. The gift wrap from the store graffitied the paper with so much tape, and it was all too kitschy in the first place. Filed some clinical notes, edited my vows in bed for about 20 minutes, checked my emails again, and then drifted off to sleep, a touch after 2 a.m. It was, by all accounts, the perfect night. Perfectionists are not balanced people, and that's okay. Subscribing to prepackaged notions of balance and generic wellness when they don't fit who you are isn't being healthy. It's being obedient. I wrote this book for the women who are done being good. I wrote this book for the women who are ready to set themselves free. If you were sitting across from me on my therapist couch right now, we could share confidential eye rolls over how you've been told ad nauseum that perfectionists set themselves free by getting rid of their perfectionism. I'm telling you right now that that will never work. Writing, "I will not be a perfectionist" 1,000 times on the proverbial chalkboard is a complete waste of your time. So, how do you set yourself free, or even begin to understand what freedom looks like for you? You start by being honest with yourself about who you are. You admit that you'd never be satisfied with an average life. You long to excel, and you know it. You acknowledge just how much you thrive by being pushed. You need a challenge, or your boredom risks tipping over into a depressive episode. And you stop playing small and denying your gifts. You were born to shine, and you can feel it. Until now, you've resisted your perfectionistic tendencies in response to our collective portrayal of perfectionism, which is deeply skewed and highly selective. It leads with the negative, which is true but not holistic, to demonstrate how perfectionism is bad, abruptly concluding that perfectionists are unhealthy and need to be fixed. Interestingly, read predictably, the push to curb perfectionism and be perfectly imperfect is directed towards women. Have you ever heard a man refer to himself as a recovering perfectionist? When Steve Jobs or Gordon Ramsay or James Cameron demand perfection, they're exalted as geniuses in their respective fields. Where are the celebrated female perfectionists? You could argue that Martha Stewart built an empire on her perfectionism and is perhaps the most celebrated female perfectionist of our time. But notice what her company, Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia, centers itself on: brunch recipes in a pinch, all things holiday entertaining, paint palettes that pop, weddings. These are archetypal homemaker interests. Martha Stewart wears her perfectionism on her sleeve to roaring acclamation instead of being told to be more balanced, that is, temper her powerful drive, because her interests stay within the realm of what is acceptable for women to be publicly ambitious about. None of this is a coincidence. Part of the urging to stamp out perfectionism in women arises because perfectionism is a powerful energy. Like every kind of power, the power of wealth, words, beauty, love, etc., perfectionism, if you don't understand how to harness it correctly, will corrupt your life. Perfectionism makes an excellent servant and a terrible master. Let's also be honest about that. Can we just say it? We both know that in the past, your perfectionism has tortured you in every arena of life. professionally, romantically, artistically, physically, spiritually. That's because you didn't understand it as a power and a gift. You didn't respect it. You tried to deny it, and you reduced it to a proclivity for tidiness and punctuality, though real perfectionism has little to do with either. The more you pushed your perfectionism away, the harder it pushed back. You couldn't get rid of your perfectionism if you tried, and try you did, because it's a fundamental component of who you are. Lucky for you, the deepest, most powerful parts of who you are never abandon you. Whatever you did to numb out or downplay or otherwise mute the powerful energy inside you that you didn't know what to do with, I did it too. It's okay. None of it worked. Thankfully, your perfectionism is still intact, and now you have a real solution to your problem. Your problem is not that you're a perfectionist. Some of the most joyful, extraordinary, fulfilled people in the world are perfectionists. Your problem is that you're not being your full self. Women receive an eternal fountain of directives every day about how to be less, how to weigh less, how to want less, how to be less emotional, how to say yes less. Certainly, how to be less of a perfectionist. This is a book about more, about how to get more of what you want by being more of who you are. I've been working with perfectionists for years in my private practice in New York City. This book is based on that work, as well as my clinical experience in a broad range of settings, including being an on-site therapist at Google, working in residential treatment, and counseling in an addiction rehab center. Long obsessed with exploring the ways we struggle, grow, and thrive, I received my undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, before completing my graduate work and clinical training at Columbia University. Additionally, I completed my postgraduate certification at the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy in New York City. My research experience at the Institute of Human Development and UCLA's Hammond Lab sparked questions that I've been turning over in my mind for the past 20 years. While the depth of my curiosity about the way human beings connect to one another assures that I always have more questions than answers, I've worked to fill this book with the answers I've collected thus far. Here's one question I've been asking myself for a long time. What do people mean when they say, "I'm a perfectionist"? The colloquial definition of what it means to be a perfectionist is reduced to the following. A perfectionist is someone who wants everything to be perfect all the time, and who gets upset when things aren't perfect. It's not that simple. When people say, "I'm a perfectionist," they're not saying that they expect themselves to be perfect, others to be perfect, the weather to be perfect, all events that unfold in life to be perfect. Perfectionists are intelligent people who understand that everything can't work out perfectly all the time. What they sometimes have trouble with is understanding why they still feel so disappointed by imperfection in the face of that intellectual concession. What they sometimes wonder about is why they feel so compelled to endlessly strive. What they're sometimes confused by is what they're striving for in the first place. What they often question is why they can't just enjoy relaxing, like a normal person. What they want to know is who they are outside of what they accomplish. Every human being encounters versions of these existential curiosities at some point. Perfectionists think about them all the time. I've identified 5 types of perfectionists. By identifying which type you are, you'll unlock your gifts. You'll also gain a deeper understanding of your intense drive to excel. You'll stop squandering your willpower trying to force yourself to not be a perfectionist. And then you'll exploit all that freshly liberated energy in service of your most authentic self. The first half of this book dismantles perfectionism to better understand its parts. Chapter 1 introduces you to the 5 types of perfectionists. Chapter 2 invites you to connect to adaptive perfectionism, an advantageous dimension of perfectionism well known to the research community, but scarcely discussed in the world of commercial wellness. Chapter 3 explores perfectionism from a feminist perspective. In addition to showing you the difference between control and power, Chapter 4 peels back the layers of perfectionism to offer an in-depth understanding of what perfectionism is, when it's healthy, and when it's not. The second half of this book shows you how to restructure your perfectionism in a way that works for you, not against you. In Chapter 5, you'll learn about the number 1 mistake perfectionists make, and in Chapter 6, you'll learn what to do instead. Chapter 7 offers 10 key perspective shifts to catapult you into the healthiest mindset possible. Chapter 8 presents 8 behavioral strategies each type of perfectionist can implement to sustain their progress and unlock long-term growth. The final chapter of this book answers a question every perfectionist must face. I know I'm technically free to do what I want, so why do I still feel so trapped? Ultimately, this book will teach you how to make the single greatest trade you'll ever make in your life, which is to exchange superficial control for real power. If you're looking for a book to instruct you on how to deal with the parts of yourself that are broken, you'll have to continue your journey elsewhere. This book explores the possibility that, even with those self-destructive habits of yours that we'll be addressing in Chapter 5, there's nothing wrong with you. This is a phrase I've learned people do not like to hear in therapy. Excluding narcissists, no one comes to therapy to hear that they're okay, good, extraordinary, in fact. This is a phrase I've learned people do not like to hear in therapy. Excluding narcissists, no one comes to therapy to hear that they're okay, good, extraordinary, in fact. Most people harbor a private suspicion that they're worse off than even they themselves know. Like, it's bad. And going to therapy represents their readiness to hear just how bad it really is. Basically, people want to know how broken they are via professional consultation and in clinical speak. They'd also like help navigating the world with all their jagged defectiveness. No. Investing in a pathologized version of who you are is a profoundly unnecessary use of your energy. It's also an excuse for you to avoid healing. I'm not here for either. I'm here to shift the focus of the conversation from weakness to strength, from correction to connection, from pathology to phenomenology, from fear to curiosity, from reactivity to proactivity, from eradication to integration, from treatment to healing. Perfectionism does not have to be a struggle. You do not have to stop being a perfectionist to be healthy. If at any point you wish to return to the notion that you need to be corrected instead of seen, stop reading. We all sway in our readiness to step into our power. You're allowed to sway too. It's okay to need more time or flatly refuse to grow. I'd add that it's also okay to not want to grow in the first place, but that point would be moot for you. You're a perfectionist. You cannot shut off your desire to ascend. You can't help but test the limits. You can't help but poke the bear. Here's another question I've spent years exploring. What if your perfectionism exists to help you? Some gifts feel like a burden until you understand how they can serve you. Let me show you how your perfectionism is a gift to you, and how you are a gift to the world. Chapter 1. Expect to be graded on the 5 types of perfectionists when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. C. G. Jung. A procrastinator perfectionist would experience immense difficulty writing this sentence because it comes at the beginning of a book about perfectionism and, accordingly, needs to be perfect. And there's no better first sentence than the one a procrastinator perfectionist imagines in her head but never actually writes down. A classic perfectionist writes the first sentence, hates it, tries her best to forget it ever existed, but is inevitably haunted by it for a minimum of 8 years. An intense perfectionist writes it, hates it, and then channels her frustration into aggression about something entirely unrelated. A Parisian perfectionist pretends not to notice she wrote a first sentence, affecting an air of, "Oh yeah, I guess I did. Huh." Then she secretly, desperately hopes everyone loves it, and, as a result, loves her. Who wrote that first sentence? I must be friends with her immediately. A messy perfectionist writes the first sentence, loves it, and then writes 17 other, very different versions of the first sentence and loves each one of those and couldn't possibly pick just one because you can't have a favorite child, and those are all her sentence babies. One thing they all have in common: they might not even know they're perfectionists, nor appreciate all the ways perfectionism can hold them back or allow them to soar, depending on how it's managed. In the most basic sense, managing your perfectionism looks like becoming aware of the core impulse all perfectionists reflexively experience. Noticing room for improvement. This could be better, and then consciously responding to that reflex instead of unconsciously reacting to it. Perfectionists are people who consistently notice the difference between an ideal and a reality, and who strive to maintain a high degree of personal accountability. This results in the perfectionist experiencing, more often than not, a compulsion to bridge the gulf between reality and an ideal themselves. When left unchallenged, the perfectionist mindset hooks itself on the motive to perfect, as opposed to improve upon or accept that which could be made better. This impulse to enhance evolves into a belief that urgently wallpapers itself on all sides of the perfectionist's mind, including the ceiling and floor. I need something to be different about this moment before I can be satisfied. Perfectionism is the invisible language your mind thinks in. The type of perfectionism that shows up in your everyday life based on your personality is just the accent. I built my private practice around perfectionism because I so enjoy the energy of the perfectionist. Always pushing limits, forever poking the bear, unafraid to travel to the depth of their anger or desire, eternally seeking a connection to something bigger, to more. Acknowledging that you want more is an act of boldness, and every perfectionist, when they're being honest, which people generally are in therapy, flaunts a bold streak I'm magnetically drawn towards. I work mostly with women who can present well, who can seem completely put together when they want to seem that way, and whose problems aren't immediately apparent to others. This is exceedingly nuanced work because, as I suspect you know all too well, no one can hide their suffering better than the highly functioning person. I thrive on the constant challenge because, as I realized during one of the most disorienting moments of my life, I'm a perfectionist myself. The cliché of it all bothers me still. I never realized how attached I was to control until I started to lose so much of it. In the exact moment that my personal and professional life began skyrocketing, I was diagnosed with cancer. I lost a pregnancy and had no opportunity to freeze my eggs before chemotherapy. I lost an extraordinary amount of time to the busyness of being sick. I lost my pretty brown hair. I lost confidence in my brand new marriage. I lost professional opportunities I had spent years working towards. I lost control over the life I had painstakingly, perfectly constructed. One moment I was riding the rapids, Then the next it was as if something yanked me by the stomach into the still, quiet, and unseen place behind the waterfall. I was looking at what I'd always been looking at, perfectionism, but from a different vantage point. Why was I in a different position? Because in a misguided effort to be more balanced and healthy, I was resisting my own perfectionism. I was sick, so of course I should have been relaxing, doing the bare minimum. It all made sense on paper, so I tried, I really did. And it was terrible, it really was. I was plopping pink bath bombs into my tub and sitting there watching them fizz away, bored out of my fucking mind, when I would have much rather been working, pushing, doing. Not pushing from a compensatory or avoidant place, not pushing to the extent that it disrupted my healing, but pushing because I enjoy being intensely engaged in my work and in my life. The energy my perfectionist clients brought into the room presented in stark contrast to what I had started to feel in my private life. Their energy was charged, magnetic, brimming with infinite potentialities, destructive and constructive all at once. In noticing the burgeoning differences between myself and my clients, I simultaneously recognized the similarities that had been there the whole time. I saw perfectionism for the power that it is, a strength I wanted to reclaim. It was a dynamic energy I had been helping my clients harness and exploit to their advantage for years, without having the language I have now for what I was doing. It wasn't until I tried to suppress the drive of my own perfectionism that I realized what I had in it. I also realized that if I could be a perfectionist, me, the woman who could never find her phone and who extolled the work of social scientist extraordinaire Dr. Brené Brown to people behind her in line at the grocery store, then anybody could be a perfectionist and not even know it. What exactly was happening here? I started to reverse engineer perfectionism, turn it inside out. In examining my own perfectionism and diving into the years I spent working with perfectionists, clear patterns emerged. 5 distinct presentations of one core concept, the 5 types of perfectionists. Because perfectionism operates on a continuum, all perfectionists can embody aspects of each type within them. Though one type is usually dominant, it's also possible to experience contextually specific manifestations of perfectionism. For example, you can be a messy perfectionist when it comes to dating, but a classic perfectionist during the holidays. Since I'm not a procrastinator perfectionist and can easily pick an entry point, let's start our discussion of the 5 types at the beginning. Classic perfectionists. The 5 types of perfectionism. Tuesday, 10:58 a.m., I opened the door for my 11 a.m. session. Claire was standing in the waiting room, hovering around 4 empty chairs, finishing an email on her phone. "And done," she said, as she efficiently gathered her small army of belongings to bring into my office. A jacket, 2 phones, a laptop bag, an indiscriminately labeled commuter bag for her heels, a not indiscriminately labeled Prada bag, and 2 grande, unsweetened iced passion teas from Starbucks. "We talked about this," I said after noticing the extra drink. "Can I help you with any of that?" "I got it," she replied, modern-day juggling act in motion. Claire entered my office seamlessly, swaying through the door like a red velvet curtain at showtime on opening night, gloriously on cue. As is the case with classic perfectionists, there was something ceremonious about Claire, who at 22 had legally changed her name because the original spelling didn't include the E at the end, a detail that irked her intolerably. As she described to me, from 2nd grade on, every single time I wrote my name, I died a little on the inside. Cumulatively, I'm sure it's taken 2 years off my life, but it's fixed now. She pulled some kind of highly absorbent towelette out of her bag and wiped the water beads off the sides and bottom of her clear plastic Starbucks cup before setting it on the coaster. "I love these coasters. I don't want them getting wet," she explained. In fairness, they were really pretty coasters. Claire repeated the water bead sweep with the cup she had brought me before setting it down on my desk and saying, "I know we talked about it." Switching her tone to a perky whisper and with a half wink, she added, "But I also know you'll drink it after I leave." Then she sat in the exact same place on the couch that she sat in every week. But that's not a classic perfectionist thing. Everyone does that. The difference between putting your phone down next to you and setting your phone down next to you, that is a classic perfectionist thing. Classic perfectionists tend to be extremely deliberate about the way they handle physical objects. For example, they might set their phones down, meaning they take both hands, lay the phone down, and then take half a second to just kind of tilt it a bit, officially designating its otherwise arbitrary placement on the couch. This micro-ritual that so many classic perfectionists perform always looked to me like tucking the phone into an invisible little bed with no covers. In a way that never got old, noticing the idiosyncrasy gave me a sweet dot of private joy. Claire set her two phones next to her on the couch, only to flip them over mid-sentence 30 seconds later when they started lighting up. I closed the door after Claire, with an E, as she loved to say, left. My iced passion tea was watered down by the past 45 minutes, but still as refreshing as ever. Classic perfectionists. Classic perfectionists, not surprisingly, present in a classic way, and Claire with an E was no exception. Everything about her was so clean and crisp, as if she'd purchased all her belongings earlier that morning and started a brand new pop-up life. I think she made my couch cleaner just by sitting on it. I had seen on Pinterest that if you run a lint roller along the bottom of your purse, you can easily pick up all the crumbs and bits accrued at the bottom. I hadn't checked, but I imagined that Claire didn't have any crumbs and bits, not at the bottom of her purse at least. But she was honest in our conversations together. She opened up to me about the invisible crumbs and bits in her life, the kinds of problems Pinterest hacks unfortunately can't solve for. Only because Claire chose to let me in did I have any inkling that there was turmoil under the surface. Highly self-disciplined, classic perfectionists are adept at presenting in a uniform way, making it difficult to take their emotional temperature. Are they thrilled? Enraged? Having the best orgasm of their life? Who knows? They're either stoic or smiling, as if they're about to have their picture taken. While it's easy to interpret this engagement style as inauthentic or closed off, it's anything but. Classic perfectionists can be experienced by others as unapproachable or haughty. But the order this type builds around themselves is about reverence, not creating a wall. Classic perfectionists aren't trying to be impressive or distance themselves as much as they're trying to offer to others what they most value themselves: structure, consistency, predictability, an understanding of all the options so as to make an informed choice, high standards, objectivity, clarity through organization. The opposite of inauthentic, classic perfectionists operate with incredible transparency about their particular set of preferences.